The clock on Sarah Chen's nightstand read 2:47 a.m. when she heard the sound. It wasn't loud, just the soft creak of the front door opening, followed by the barely audible padding of footsteps across the hardwood floor of their modest suburban home. She had been drifting in and out of an uneasy sleep, her mind still churning from the day's responsibilities. The stack of ungraded essays piling up on her desk at Roosevelt High School, the leak in the upstairs bathroom that the plumber kept postponing, and the growing concern about her 17-year-old son, Marcus, who had been acting increasingly distant lately. Sarah pulled herself up on one elbow, her heart quickening. It wasn't unusual for Marcus to be up late. Teenagers rarely seemed to need sleep anymore, but sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night was something entirely different. She'd raised him better than that, or so she'd always believed. She was a single mother who had dedicated herself to providing not just for his physical needs, but for his moral and emotional development. She'd tried to maintain open lines of communication, to be the kind of parent who understood the pressures and confusions of adolescence. She slipped out of bed quietly, pulling her cardigan around her shoulders against the chill of the December night, and made her way to the window. Peering through the Venetian blinds, she saw a figure moving down the driveway, definitely Marcus. He was tall like his father had been, with that same confident stride, though it was tempered now with what looked like hesitation and nervous energy. He wore his navy hoodie, the one she'd bought him last winter, and carried a backpack that looked heavier than usual. Sarah's mind immediately conjured worst-case scenarios. Drugs, gang activity, some kind of criminal enterprise. She knew these fears were partially irrational, fed by the sensational news stories and the anxiety of single parenthood, but they felt very real in the darkness of the night. Marcus was a good kid, he maintained decent grades, had never been in serious trouble, played soccer for the school team. But he'd been withdrawn recently, spending hours in his room, being evasive about his activities and his friends. There was something weighing on him, something he wasn't sharing with her. She made a decision that surprised her even as she made it. Instead of confronting him immediately or doing what the parenting book suggested, waiting for the right moment to discuss it calmly, she was going to follow him, just to know what he was doing, just to understand. Within 5 minutes, Sarah had thrown on jeans and a jacket, grabbed her purse, and was quietly starting her 10-year-old Honda Civic. She kept the headlights off until she turned out of their residential street, then followed the distant figure of her son at a safe distance. He moved with purpose, walking quickly despite the late hour, toward the downtown area of their small city, Millbrook, Massachusetts, a picturesque town of about 30,000 people nestled in the Pioneer Valley. Marcus turned down several side streets, cutting through a parking lot, navigating the nighttime landscape with the familiarity of someone who had traveled this route before. Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. How many times had he done this? How long had this been going on? Finally, he stopped in front of an old brick building on Elm Street, the historic district where local businesses and artists maintained studios and shops. The building itself looked rundown, its windows dark except for a single light emanating from what appeared to be the basement level. Marcus checked around cautiously, then descended the stairs that led below street level. Sarah parked her car half a block away and waited, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt like a spy, like a criminal herself, but the need to know what her son was involved in outweighed her guilt at the deception. 20 minutes passed, 30, an hour. She was about to give up and head home to confront him when he returned when she heard music. Faint at first, then clearer, the sound of voices singing in harmony, creating something achingly beautiful. Sarah had always loved music. It was one of the few indulgences she allowed herself after paying the mortgage and the bills. She would put on Debussy or old jazz standards while grading papers late at night, letting the music soothe her weary mind. The melody floated up from the basement and Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. The voices seemed to weep and sing simultaneously, expressing emotions that words could never capture. The arrangement was definitely professional level. The people producing those notes had studied, had practiced thousands of hours. She looked at her phone, 2:15 a.m. Who was singing at this hour, and more importantly, what was Marcus doing in there? Unable to resist, Sarah carefully exited her car and approached the building. The basement window was barred, but there was a small gap where she could peer through. Inside, the light was dim, coming from what looked like candles and a single old lamp. She could see several figures, but not clearly enough to identify them. She could see people standing in formation, singing with their eyes closed, completely lost in the music. The music continued, a piece she now recognized as a contemporary a cappella arrangement. It was being performed with such emotion, such technical mastery, that Sarah found herself frozen in place listening. The piece seemed to build toward an emotional climax, the voices becoming more urgent, more desperate, as if the musicians were pouring their very souls into the song. And then suddenly she heard Marcus's voice singing. His voice had changed over the past year, deepened, but she had never heard him sing like this. He wasn't singing a melody alone, but rather weaving in and out of complex harmonies with the others, creating a blend of sound that was hauntingly beautiful. She could hear the passion in his voice, the way the lyrics seemed to resonate with something deep within him. The song ended on a lingering note that seemed to hang in the air long after the singers had gone silent. Sarah heard the murmur of voices, laughter, genuine, warm laughter. Her son was laughing, really laughing, in a way she couldn't remember him laughing in months. There was a lightness to it, a freedom that broke her heart because she realized how much he'd been carrying alone. She retreated to her car, her mind whirling. This wasn't a criminal enterprise or dangerous behavior. This was something else entirely. This was her son doing something he clearly loved, doing it with people he cared about in secret because what? Because he was embarrassed, because she had somehow made him feel he couldn't share this part of himself with her. The guilt hit Sarah like a physical force. Here she was, spying on her own child, assuming the worst when all along he'd been engaged in something beautiful. She decided then that she would wait for him to come home, would let him settle, would give him space. And then when the moment was right, she would ask him about it, not with anger or accusation, but with genuine curiosity about this part of his life she knew nothing about. It was nearly 4:00 a.m. when Marcus returned home. Sarah heard him enter through the front door, heard him climbing the stairs to his room. She remained awake for the rest of the night, listening to the silence of the house, thinking about the singing, about the sound of her son's voice joining with others in harmony. By the time morning came, Sarah had formed a plan. She wouldn't confront Marcus directly about his midnight outings. Instead, she would find out who was involved in the singing group, who was behind this secret musical life her son was living. Because if there was one thing the singing had told her, it was that Marcus was involved with people who meant something to him, people who had earned his trust and his passion. And that, Sarah realized, was both beautiful and terrifying. The next few days were consumed with a detective game Sarah had never intended to play. She found herself researching the old building on Elm Street, making phone calls under the pretense of other business, trying to figure out what was housed in that basement. It wasn't until she was at the coffee shop near downtown that she got a real lead. She'd stopped in for her usual order, a medium roast, black with a touch of honey, and was standing in line when she overheard a conversation between two young people. "The Harmony Project meeting is at 2 tomorrow," a girl with bright purple hair said to her companion, a boy with paint-stained hands. "David said he wants to introduce some new pieces we've been working on." Sarah's ears perked up immediately. The Harmony Project, that must be it. She filed the name away carefully, already planning her next steps. That evening, while Marcus was at soccer practice, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and searched for information about the Harmony Project. What she found surprised her. It was a small but well-regarded LGBTQ+ youth singing group that had been operating in the community for about 4 years. According to their website, it was dedicated to bringing together LGBTQ+ young people and allies in an inclusive, non-judgmental space to create art, build community, and celebrate our identities through music. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. LGBTQ+ youth singing group, the implications hung heavy in the air around her. She thought back to the way Marcus had been acting, the withdrawal, the secrecy, the new friends he wouldn't talk about. She thought about all the subtle signs she might have missed or misinterpreted. She continued reading, learning that the Harmony Project met in the basement of the old Hartley building downtown, offering rehearsals twice a week for members, all completely free. They had a focus on contemporary music, arrangements of songs that spoke to LGBTQ+ experiences and identities. They performed at various community events and pride celebrations. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she continued scrolling through the website. She wasn't crying because she disapproved, far from it. She was crying because she realized how much her son had been struggling alone, how he'd felt the need to hide something so essential to who he was. She was crying because she hadn't noticed. She was crying for the strength it must have taken him to keep searching for community, for acceptance, even while living in a house where he couldn't be fully himself. The website had photos from recent events and performances. Sarah scrolled through them methodically, looking for Marcus's face. There, a photo from a fall performance of Pride Month songs. Marcus was there, standing in the back row of the ensemble, his face caught mid-smile as he sang alongside about a dozen other young people. He looked radiant in a way she'd never seen before. But then another photo stopped her cold. It was from a more recent rehearsal, and in the center of the frame, standing with his arms raised as if conducting or leading, was a young man. He was perhaps 18 or 19, with warm brown skin, close-cropped hair with a touch of fade design on the sides, and a face that was alive with intelligence and passion. He wore a simple white t-shirt and dark jeans, and he was caught mid-laugh, looking at someone off camera with an expression that Sarah could only describe as full of light and joy. The caption read, David Martinez, co-founder and director of the Harmony Project, leads a rehearsal. David is a freshman at University of Massachusetts studying music theory and composition. David Martinez, the name seemed to contain layers of meaning. Sarah studied the photo more closely, trying to understand the significance of this person in her son's life. He was older, clearly talented, clearly a leader in this community. What was his relationship with Marcus? Was he a mentor, a friend, something more? Sarah closed her laptop and sat back, feeling like she'd opened a door she might not be able to close again. She needed to know more. She needed to understand not just what Marcus was doing, but more importantly, who he was becoming, who he was allowing himself to be when he was away from her. She knew she needed to have a conversation with her son, but she also knew that the way she approached it would be crucial. If she came at him with accusations or judgment, he would shut down completely. If she acted shocked or disapproving, she might push him further away. She needed to approach this with love, with genuine curiosity, with the kind of unconditional acceptance that every young person deserved as they figured out who they were. That evening, when Marcus came home from soccer practice, smelling of sweat and grass, Sarah greeted him with a casual smile that belied the new knowledge she carried and the careful plan she'd developed. "How was practice?" she asked, stirring the pasta she'd prepared for dinner. "Good," Marcus said, dropping his backpack by the door. His response was brief, his manner still carrying that distance that had become familiar over recent months. "Coach says we have a real shot at making the playoffs this year." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, meaning it. "You've been working hard, you deserve recognition for it." Marcus nodded, grabbing a plate and helping himself to dinner. They ate in the comfortable silence that had developed between them recently, not cold but not as open as it had once been. Sarah could feel the weight of unsaid things hanging between them, the vast gap between his internal reality and what he was willing to share with her. She decided that tonight wasn't the right time. She would give him a few more days, would think carefully about how to approach this conversation. She would wait for a moment when they weren't tired from school and practice, when there was time and space for real dialogue. Instead, she asked carefully, "Are you doing anything special this weekend?" "I have a game Saturday," Marcus said, "and Sunday, I have a thing." "A thing?" Sarah raised her eyebrows gently, inviting elaboration without pushing. Marcus shifted in his seat. "Yeah, just a thing with some friends, nothing major." Sarah nodded, taking a bite of pasta. "That sounds nice, what kind of thing?" "Just singing and stuff, nothing important." It took all of Sarah's self-control not to react. She knew now that these singing things were probably the most important parts of his week. But she merely nodded and said, "Well, that's nice that you have friends who share your interests." Marcus looked up at her with sudden wariness, as if trying to determine whether she knew more than she was saying. But after a moment, he seemed to relax. "Yeah, I guess it is." That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about the Harmony Project and David Martinez. She thought about what it must take for a young person to come out, to find community, to allow themselves to be fully visible in their queerness. She thought about all the young people in that basement, singing together, supporting each other, creating art that celebrated who they were. She thought about her son, and she made a decision. When she had this conversation with him, she was going to make sure he knew that she loved him completely, that nothing about his identity changed his value or her pride in him, that she was sorry it had taken her so long to understand that he needed space to be himself. The Harmony Project concert couldn't come soon enough. Sarah discovered the concert announcement on the Harmony Project's social media page. Winter Solstice Celebration, a night of music, community, and pride. It was scheduled for Saturday evening at the Community Theater downtown, a beautiful Victorian-era building with ornate gold trim and red velvet seats. The event would feature performances by members of the Harmony Project, with all proceeds going to a local LGBTQ+ youth center. Sarah purchased 2 tickets immediately, intending to bring Jennifer, her colleague from school, but as the date approached, she reconsidered. This concert felt too important, too personal. She wanted to attend alone, to have her own emotional experience without worrying about explaining things to a friend. The evening of the concert arrived on a cold December night, the kind where frost sparkled on the sidewalks and the air tasted like winter. Sarah had dressed carefully in dark slacks and a burgundy blouse, wanting to look nice but not overdressed. She arrived at the theater early and found herself a seat in the middle section, positioned so she could see the stage clearly but not be immediately visible to the performers. The theater began to fill up with an eclectic and joyful mix of people. Families with children, elderly couples, young people who were clearly friends of the performers or members of the LGBTQ community themselves. There was an energy in the air that Sarah could feel immediately, a sense of celebration and community, of people coming together to witness and affirm each other's identities and talents. Finally, the lights dimmed, a hush fell over the audience, and then the music began. A single spotlight illuminated the stage, revealing David Martinez standing at a simple piano. He wore a sharp navy suit with a subtle rainbow pin on the lapel, and his presence commanded attention without demanding it. His hands moved across the piano keys with evident skill and emotion, beginning a piece that Sarah immediately recognized as a contemporary composition about identity and self-discovery. The music was extraordinary. David played with technical precision but never at the expense of emotion. Each note seemed to carry meaning, seemed to express something deeply human. The piece built toward an emotional crescendo, the music becoming more insistent, more passionate, as if the composer was pouring their very soul into the composition. When the first piece ended, the audience erupted in applause. David bowed, his face flushed, and as he straightened up, Sarah saw him scan the audience. For a moment, his eyes seemed to linger on the spot where she was sitting, and she wondered if he was looking for someone specific. The concert continued with various pieces and performers. A small ensemble performed an arrangement of a classic Broadway number reimagined with queer themes. A solo artist performed an original composition about coming out and finding acceptance. And then, about halfway through the program, Marcus appeared on stage. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He wore all black like the other performers, and he looked both vulnerable and confident at the same time. He was not alone. There were 4 other young people on stage with him, standing in a tight formation. And David was there too, conducting them with his hands, his whole body engaged in the music. The next piece is an original composition written by David Martinez, the program note explained. It's a collaboration between David and several members of the Harmony Project. It's called Becoming. The lights dimmed to a deep blue. David began to sing, his voice rich and warm, expressing the journey of coming into oneself, of discovering one's true identity and learning to accept it. And then Marcus began to sing as well, his voice blending with David's, creating harmonies that supported and elevated the solo line. Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. This wasn't just singing. This was art. This was her son in his truest form, expressing emotions and experiences that she had no access to, a full interior life that had been completely unknown to her. But more than that, this was her son being seen, being affirmed, being celebrated for exactly who he was. The piece built toward a climax, the ensemble voices rising in intensity, the piano underneath them providing both support and drama. And then it came, a moment where Marcus's voice seemed to reach across the theater and touch something deep within Sarah's chest. The lyrics spoke of fear and hope intertwined, of the courage it took to be visible, to claim one's identity despite the world's resistance. Finally, the piece ended with David holding a long, lingering note while the singers faded into silence. The theater remained quiet for a long moment, that perfect moment of reverence that follows truly great art. Then the audience erupted in applause that seemed to go on, and Sarah found herself standing, tears streaming down her face, clapping so hard her hands hurt. Marcus grinned, looking genuinely happy in a way Sarah hadn't seen in months. He linked hands with the other singers and they bowed together. When they straightened up, Marcus's eyes scanned the audience, searching for something. For a moment, Sarah thought he might see her. She found herself standing, making herself visible. His eyes widened when he spotted her, surprise and something like fear crossing his face. But then David put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, and when Marcus looked at the older man, something passed between them, a look of understanding, of shared knowledge, of connection. The concert continued for another hour, featuring various other performances. But Sarah was no longer entirely focused on the stage. Her mind was working through implications, observations, the careful pieces of a puzzle she was beginning to understand. After the final bows and the audience began filing out of the theater, Sarah made her way backstage, using a pass that was being handed out to all audience members at the door. The backstage area was controlled chaos, young people hugging each other, celebrating, comparing notes on how the performance had gone. There was a palpable sense of joy and community, of young people who had found their people. She spotted Marcus near the back of the stage talking with a group of friends. When he saw her, his expression shifted, surprise, wariness, a kind of careful guardedness that broke Sarah's heart. She approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Marcus," she said softly. He turned and his face went pale. For a moment she thought he might run, then he seemed to collect himself, walking toward her with cautious steps. "Mom," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "what are you doing here?" "I came to hear the concert," Sarah said simply. "You were wonderful, all of you, but especially you." Marcus's jaw clenched. She could see the conflict playing out on his face, relief that she was here, terror about what her presence meant. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly, pulling her to a more private corner of the backstage area, away from the other performers. Sarah decided to be honest. "I followed you to a rehearsal about a week ago. I heard the music and I didn't understand at first. I looked up the Harmony Project online." Marcus looked away, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You followed me, you spied on me." "Yes," Sarah admitted. "I'm sorry, you were sneaking out in the middle of the night and I was worried. I wasn't thinking clearly, I should have just asked you." "Asked me what?" Marcus's voice was sharp now, defensive. "Asked you if I'm gay, is that what this is about?" Sarah felt the full weight of that question. This was the moment that mattered, the moment where she either affirmed her son or failed him. She took a breath. "No," she said clearly. "I came tonight because I wanted to understand your life, the part of your life that brings you joy. I heard you singing weeks ago and I could tell how much it meant to you. So yes, I did some research. And yes, I figured out that the Harmony Project is a space where you can be fully yourself. And I'm here to tell you that I love you, all of you, completely." Marcus's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You really mean that? You're not disappointed or angry." "Disappointed?" Sarah stepped closer to her son. "Why would I be disappointed? I just watched you perform beautifully. I heard you singing about becoming yourself. I felt the joy radiating off that stage. That's not something to be disappointed about, that's something to celebrate." "But you always wanted me to play soccer and go to a good college and have a normal life," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I didn't think you'd understand, I didn't think you could accept." "That you're gay," Sarah said gently. "That you're part of this community, that you have a life separate from what I thought it should be." Marcus nodded miserably. "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah said, pulling him into an embrace despite his resistance. I'm sorry that I made you feel like you had to hide. I'm sorry that I was so focused on my ideas of what your life should look like that I didn't see who you actually are." Marcus was shaking now, whether from emotion or the shock of the situation, Sarah wasn't sure. After a moment, he relaxed into her embrace, allowing himself to be held by his mother. "I love you," Sarah whispered. "I love you and I'm proud of you and I'm sorry it took me this long to understand that those things go hand in hand." They stood like that for a long moment, finally bridging the gap that had grown between them. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus's face was wet with tears. "Does this mean I can tell you about David?" he asked hesitantly. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. David, the conductor, the composer, the older young man who had looked at Marcus with such obvious affection during the performance. "Yes," she said, "tell me about David." Over the next few weeks, Sarah discovered a whole new dimension to her son's life, one that was vibrant and complex and filled with a kind of joy she'd never seen in him before. With the secret finally out in the open, Marcus was able to talk more freely about the Harmony Project, about his friends in the group, and most importantly, about David Martinez. "He's been leading the group for about 2 years," Marcus explained one evening as they sat together in the living room, a cup of hot chocolate growing cold on the coffee table between them. "He founded it with his best friend from high school when he realized there wasn't really a safe space for LGBTQ plus young people in our area to come together and create music. Before David, I didn't know anyone else like me. I felt so alone." Sarah listened intently, hearing the gratitude and admiration in her son's voice. "And you've been attending the group for how long?" she asked. "About 8 months, Marcus said. "I found out about it through a friend at school who was involved. I was terrified to go to my first rehearsal. I remember walking down those basement stairs thinking I was going to have a panic attack. But then David started talking about the group's mission, about creating a space where every person's identity and experience was valued, and I cried." right there in the middle of the first meeting. "Oh, Marcus," Sarah said softly. "David came over to me after and asked if I was okay, and I just told him everything. About how I'd known I was different since middle school but I was too scared to tell anyone, how I didn't think there was anyone else like me in this whole town, and he just listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything. He just listened." Sarah could see how much that moment had meant to her son. She could understand why someone who had offered that kind of unconditional acceptance and understanding would become important to him. "What's David like?" she asked, beyond the music. Marcus's face brightened. "He's amazing. He's so smart. He's studying music composition and theory at UMass. He's written a bunch of original pieces, and most of them are about LGBTQ+ experiences. He's also just really kind, you know. Like he remembers everyone's names and their pronouns and what's going on in their lives. When someone in the group has a problem, he helps them figure it out. He organized a whole series of workshops about coming out and navigating family stuff." "It sounds like he's had a big impact on you," Sarah observed carefully. Marcus nodded, then hesitated. "Yeah, he has. Actually, I mean, Mom, he's the reason I was able to accept myself. He showed me that it was possible to be queer and talented and happy and not feel ashamed about it." Sarah heard the way her son was dancing around something, the careful way he was building toward a confession. She waited patiently, giving him the space to continue. "And then," Marcus continued slowly, "about 2 months ago something changed. He asked me to help him arrange some pieces for a new concert series. We started spending a lot of time together outside of rehearsals. We'd go get coffee and talk about music and life and everything. And at some point I realized that I had feelings for him, like more than just admiration." Sarah's heart clenched. She'd suspected this might be the case from the way David had looked at Marcus during the concert, but hearing her son say it out loud made it real. "And does David know about your feelings?" she asked gently. Marcus nodded, his face flushing deeply. "Yeah, because he has feelings for me too. We started dating about 6 weeks ago." There it was, the full revelation. Sarah took a moment to process this information, aware that her response in this moment was crucial. "Tell me about that," she said finally. "Tell me about David and what he means to you." Marcus looked relieved that she wasn't reacting with shock or disapproval. He sat back in the couch and a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "It's not like dating someone from school," he began. "David is older and he's been out since he was 15. He's been in relationships before and he's so patient with me. He understands that this is new for me, that I'm still figuring things out. He doesn't push me to do anything I'm not ready for, he just makes me feel safe and valued." "That's important," Sarah said, thinking about how vulnerable young people were in relationships, how much damage could be done by someone who didn't honor that vulnerability. "The best part," Marcus continued, "is that he gets what music means to me. He understands why I sneak out to rehearsals instead of just telling you. He understood why I felt like I had to hide this part of myself, and when I finally told him everything, he helped me figure out how to come out to you. He was actually the one who encouraged me to go through with it, to let you see the concert, to give you the chance to understand." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. This David Martinez sounded like an exceptional young man. He sounded like someone who truly cared about her son's well-being and growth, not someone who was taking advantage of him. "I'd like to meet him properly," Sarah said, "not just backstage after a concert but to actually sit down and talk with him." "Really?" Marcus looked hopeful and terrified at the same time. "Really?" Sarah confirmed. "He's clearly important to you and that makes him important to me. Besides, I want to thank him for helping you find your community and for supporting you through coming out." Marcus's face lit up with a smile so genuine and so bright that it broke Sarah's heart all over again. How much unhappiness had her son been carrying alone, and for how long? "I think he'd like that," Marcus said. "He was nervous about you after the concert. He wasn't sure how you were going to react to learning that you have a gay son." "Well," Sarah said, "you can tell David that I'm not nervous about that at all. I'm just grateful to have the real Marcus back. The one who sings and has friends who matter to him and is happy." David Martinez arrived at the Chen household on a Saturday afternoon in mid-January, carrying a homemade dessert in a covered container, and wearing an expression of careful politeness that Sarah recognized as nervousness. She opened the door to find a young man who looked both older and younger than his 19 years, his face open and expressive, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, taking in every detail of the foyer, the living room, the evidence of who the Chen family was. "Mrs. Chen," he said, extending his hand for a shake. I'm David, thank you so much for having me. Sarah noticed immediately how respectful he was, how he made eye contact, how he seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity to meet her. She also noticed the way his eyes sought out Marcus, who was hovering nervously in the background. Please call me Sarah, she said warmly, and thank you for bringing something that was thoughtful. It's just flan, David said with a modest smile. My abuela's recipe. My family is from Puerto Rico and she always says you can't visit someone's home empty-handed. Over lunch, a simple meal of pasta and salad that Sarah had prepared carefully, wanting to make a good impression herself, Sarah found herself observing David with an attention she typically reserved for assessing her students' essays. She was looking for signs of manipulation, of someone taking advantage of her son. What she found instead was a young man of genuine kindness and intelligence, with a clear passion for music and a deep commitment to his community. So you founded the Harmony Project with a friend? She asked, her teacher instincts engaging as she looked for more information. Yes, with Marcus's friend Tanya, David explained. We went to high school together and both realized there was a real gap in services for LGBTQ plus youth in this area. We knew a lot of young people who were struggling with isolation, especially in the more rural parts of the region. So we figured, why not start a singing group? Music is something that brings people together, that makes people feel less alone. It sounds like it's been successful, Sarah said, thinking of the joyful energy she'd felt at the concert. Beyond what we expected, David admitted. We started with maybe 8 people, now we have 35 regular members ranging from 14 to 19 years old, and the impact it's had on people. Marcus isn't the only one who's told me it changed his life, but he might be special in that way. Sarah noticed the way David looked at Marcus when he said this, and she understood that there was deep affection there. She also understood that David was being careful about how much he revealed, respectful of boundaries, treating this introduction with the gravity it deserved. After lunch, Marcus and David went to the living room to put on music, some recordings of the Harmony Project's recent performances. Sarah joined them, sitting on the couch and listening as they provided context and commentary on various pieces. She watched the way they interacted, the casual ease between them that suggested a relationship that had moved beyond the initial excitement phase into something more grounded and real. At one point, David's hand rested on the back of the couch near Marcus's shoulder, and Sarah saw her son relax into that proximity, drawing comfort from it. It was a small gesture, but it told her everything she needed to know about the security Marcus felt in this relationship. Can I ask you something? Sarah said during a pause in the music. When Marcus first told you his feelings, how did you handle that? David exchanged a quick glance with Marcus, then turned to Sarah with apparent sincerity. I was careful, he said. Because I recognized that Marcus was at a vulnerable point. He'd only recently come out to himself and was still figuring out his identity. I made sure he understood that I wasn't going anywhere, that we could take things as slowly as he needed. And I was honest about the fact that there was an age difference, that I'd been out longer, that I had more experience. I wanted to make sure he wasn't feeling pressured or that he saw this relationship as a way to fast-track his understanding of himself. I appreciate that, Sarah said, and she meant it. That shows real maturity and responsibility. I care about him, David said simply, not just as a director cares about a choir member or as a mentor cares about someone they're helping. I care about him as a person. I love him. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah watched as Marcus's face flushed with emotion as he reached over and took David's hand. And she saw in that gesture the answer to any remaining questions she might have had about whether this relationship was genuine and healthy. Then I'm glad he has you, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm glad he has someone who understands what he's going through and who loves him enough to be careful with his heart. Over the following months, David became a regular presence in the Chen household. He would come over for dinners and family movie nights. He helped Marcus with his college applications, drawing on his experience as a recent high school graduate. He played music with Sarah on weekend mornings, discovering that she had once been a decent pianist and encouraging her to get back to it. Sarah watched as her son blossomed. The darkness that had surrounded him during the months of secrecy began to lift. He smiled more, he talked more, he seemed lighter, as if a weight he'd been carrying had finally been set down. In late February, on a snowy afternoon, Marcus and David were sitting in the living room working on a new arrangement when Marcus suddenly turned to David with an intensity that made Sarah, who was in the kitchen within earshot, pause. I want to do something, Marcus said. I want to write a song about us, about coming out, about finding love in the midst of all this confusion and fear. David set down his guitar. What kind of song? Something personal, Marcus said. Something that's just ours. I know we do a lot of community work and group pieces, but I want to write something that's specifically about my journey, and I want you to help me. I'd be honored, David said softly. For the next several weeks, Marcus and David worked on the song in stolen moments between rehearsals and classes. Sarah would hear them late at night, playing through different arrangements, debating lyrics, trying to capture something ineffable about the experience of falling in love while also navigating identity and acceptance. The song came together gradually. It was called Before You Found Me, and it began with Marcus singing alone, his voice describing the loneliness of those months before he found the Harmony Project, the feeling of being incomplete, of being a stranger to himself. Then David would join him, their voices weaving together as Marcus sang about the moment he realized he was loved, about the revelation that acceptance from others could help you accept yourself. One evening in early March, Marcus asked Sarah if she would listen to the complete recording. They gathered in the living room, Sarah on the couch, Marcus and David sitting on the floor with acoustic guitars. Marcus's voice was clear and vulnerable as he sang the opening verse. Then David came in, providing both harmony and emotional support, his voice rich and comforting. Sarah found herself moved to tears by the song. It was a documentation of her son's journey, yes, but it was also a love song. It was David saying to Marcus, "I see you, I love you, I will help you become who you're meant to be." And it was Marcus saying to David, "You saved me, you changed my life, I love you with everything I have." When they finished, the three of them sat in silence for a long moment. "That's beautiful," Sarah said finally, not bothering to wipe away her tears. "That's really, truly beautiful. We're going to perform it at the spring concert," Marcus said. "Just the two of us, it feels like something that needs to be shared." "Your community will be so moved by it," Sarah said. Then, hesitantly, she added, "Will you let me know when that concert is? I'd like to be there." Marcus and David exchanged a look, then both smiled. "Of course," Marcus said, "we want you there." In late March, a situation arose that tested the strength of Marcus and David's relationship and Sarah's newfound understanding of her son's identity. Marcus's father, James, called Sarah out of the blue, something he rarely did. Marcus's parents had divorced when Marcus was 5, and while Sarah had primary custody, James maintained regular visitation, though he often rescheduled or canceled at the last minute. "I want Marcus to come spend Easter weekend with me," James said without preamble. "I haven't seen him since Christmas." Sarah agreed, knowing this was within James's rights as Marcus's father, but she felt a flutter of anxiety. James was a good man, but he was also traditional, conservative in his values. She wasn't sure how he would handle learning that his son was gay. That evening, she told Marcus about the visitation plan. "Dad wants me to come stay with him Easter weekend," she said carefully. Marcus's response was immediate and visceral. "No," he said firmly, "I'm not going." "Sweetheart, your father has a right to see you," Sarah began gently. "I don't care," Marcus said, his voice rising. "I'm not ready to tell him, I'm not ready for whatever reaction he's going to have, and I don't want to go to his place and have to pretend to be someone I'm not." Sarah understood her son's fear. Coming out to his mother had been difficult enough. The idea of coming out to his father, whom he saw less regularly and whose values he was less certain about, was clearly terrifying. "Have you talked to David about this?" she asked. "Not yet," Marcus said, "but David would probably just tell me I need to do it anyway. He believes in being authentic all the time." "David cares about your well-being," Sarah said. "He wouldn't push you into something you're not ready for, but you will eventually have to tell your father." "I know," Marcus said miserably, not now, not this weekend." Sarah made a difficult decision. She called James back and explained that Marcus was going through something and wasn't ready to talk about it yet, but that she would encourage him to have the conversation with his father soon. "Is he in trouble?" James asked, concern evident in his voice. "No," Sarah assured him. "He's actually in a really good place, but he needs to be the one to tell you about it. Can you give him a few weeks?" James agreed reluctantly, though Sarah could tell he was confused and worried. She hated having to keep her son's secret from his father, but she also understood that this was Marcus's information to share when he was ready. When she told Marcus that she'd postpone the visitation, he was visibly relieved. but that relief was tinged with guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know I need to tell Dad. I know it's not fair to make you deal with his questions." "You'll tell him when you're ready," Sarah said. "But I think it would help if David was part of that conversation too, or at least if you had David's support as you prepared to have it." That evening, Marcus and David talked for hours. Sarah could hear the murmur of their voices from upstairs, the careful way David seemed to be helping Marcus process his fears and figure out a game plan. By the time David left that night, Marcus seemed more settled, more centered in his own truth. The spring concert of the Harmony Project was held on a warm evening in late April at the same community theater where Sarah had first witnessed her son's true self. But this performance felt different, more personal, more intimate. This concert was explicitly about celebrating LGBTQ+ identities and the journey of self-discovery. The audience was packed, filled with families, friends, and community members who had come to support the young performers. Sarah sat in the audience with Jennifer, who had finally learned the full story about Marcus and was genuinely touched to be included in this celebration of his life. As the concert progressed through various pieces, some humorous, some deeply emotional, all of them authentic, Sarah found herself thinking about how far her son had come in just a few months. The darkness and secrecy had been replaced by light and openness. He had found his people. He had found love. Then came the final performance of the evening. The lights dimmed to a soft blue and Marcus and David walked onto the stage together, each carrying an acoustic guitar. The audience went silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "This last piece is an original song written by Marcus Chen," David announced to the audience. "It's called Before You Found Me, and it's about finding yourself, finding your people, and finding love in the midst of that journey. I'm honored to be part of this story." The music began, and Sarah's heart clenched as she listened to her son pour his soul into those lyrics. She watched David's face as he sang, saw the love and pride there. She noticed several young people in the audience wiping away tears, understanding that they were witnessing something deeply personal and deeply true. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. But more than that, there was a sense of reverence in the theater, a recognition that these two young men had bravely shared something sacred with the community. After the concert, there was a reception in the theater lobby. Sarah found herself surrounded by members of the Harmony Project, all of whom thanked her for being supportive and for raising such a talented, authentic son. One young woman who couldn't have been more than 15 approached her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said. "And thank you for raising Marcus to be so brave. He's been a real inspiration to me. I haven't come out to my family yet, but seeing him up there, seeing his mom and the audience being so proud, it gave me hope that maybe I could do it too." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she hugged this young woman she'd never met before. She understood then that by supporting her son, by choosing love over fear, she was somehow also supporting this entire community of young people who were struggling with the same issues her son had struggled with. That night as the family drove home, Sarah said to Marcus, "You should call your father." "Right now?" Marcus asked, startled. "No," Sarah said, "but soon, tomorrow if you're ready, I think it's time." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "Will you be here when I tell him?" "Do you want me to be?" Sarah asked. "I think I do," Marcus said. "I think I need you to be here." The next afternoon, Sarah called James and set up a video chat for 6 p.m. She and Marcus sat on the couch together, and when James's face appeared on the screen, still looking like the man Sarah had married 20 years ago, though with more gray at the temples, she reached over and took her son's hand. "Dad," Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly, "I need to tell you something about myself. Something I've known for a long time but that I've only recently been able to accept." Sarah felt Marcus's hand tighten around hers as he told his father that he was gay. There was a long silence on the screen. Sarah's heart began to race, preparing for the worst, and then James said, "Okay, thank you for telling me, that took courage." Marcus looked stunned. "Really?" "Really," James said. "I won't pretend I understand everything about this, but I understand that you're my son and I love you. Nothing changes that." By the time the conversation ended 30 minutes later, James had heard the whole story, about the Harmony Project, about David, about Marcus's fears and hopes and dreams. And while he wasn't exuberant about any of it, he was accepting and kind, which was all anyone could ask for. After they hung up, Marcus let out a long breath he seemed to have been holding. "That went better than I expected," he said. "Your father loves you," Sarah said. "We all do." Part 3 True Love. The summer after Marcus's junior year was a golden time in the Chen household. Without the structure of school and with the Harmony Project taking a break for the season, Marcus and David found themselves with unexpected freedom. They spent their days working on music, going on long drives through the Massachusetts countryside, spending time at the lake, simply enjoying the early stages of their relationship. David had moved into a small apartment near the UMass campus for the summer, where he was taking classes and working part-time at a music store. But he spent most of his free time with Marcus, and increasingly he spent time with Sarah and Marcus together as a family unit. Sarah found herself enjoying David's company in ways that surprised her. He was knowledgeable about a wide range of topics, genuinely curious about the world and genuinely kind. But more than that, she could see how good he was for her son. Marcus was thriving under David's love and support. His grades had improved, his confidence had grown, and his entire demeanor had shifted from withdrawn to open and joyful. One afternoon in mid-June, Sarah was working in the backyard, planting new flowers in the garden bed, when David appeared with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Thought you might need a break," he said, handing her a glass. "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the drink gratefully. She noticed David seemed to want to say something but was hesitating. "What's on your mind?" she asked gently. "I want to ask you something," David said, sitting down on the edge of the porch step. "And I want you to be honest with me." "Of course," Sarah said, settling down beside him. "Do you think Marcus is too young to be in a serious relationship?" David asked quietly. "I know there's an age difference between us, and I worry sometimes that I'm asking him to move too fast, to grow up too quickly. I love him so much, but I don't want to hurt him." Sarah considered the question carefully. She thought about David's obvious care and respect for her son. She thought about how Marcus had transformed since they'd been together. "I think," she said finally, "that relationships are never simple or perfect no matter what age we are. But I also think that what you and Marcus have seems genuine and healthy. You respect him, you listen to him, you give him space to be himself, and he loves you. Those are the things that matter." David nodded slowly. "I was thinking," he said, "about asking him something, not right away but maybe later this summer. I wanted to see how you'd feel about it." Sarah's heart quickened with understanding. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to ask him to promise me something," David said. "Not marriage, he's too young for that and we haven't been together long enough. But I want him to promise that no matter what happens in our lives, even if we don't stay together romantically, he'll always let me be part of his life. That he won't let fear or shame or other people's judgments make him close himself off again." Sarah found herself moved by David's honesty and his care for her son. She reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "I think that's a beautiful thing to ask for," she said, "and I think Marcus would probably say yes without hesitation." It happened on a warm evening in late July at the edge of the lake that their small town was built around. Marcus and David had gone there for a picnic, something they did regularly now. David had packed all of Marcus's favorite foods: fresh fruit, good bread, cheese, dark chocolate. They sat on a blanket as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting everything in golden light. David had been quiet all day and Marcus had noticed, though he hadn't said anything about it. When they'd finished eating, David turned to Marcus and said, "I have something I want to talk to you about." Marcus's heart immediately began to race. "What is it?" he asked, a flutter of anxiety in his voice. He was thinking about how David had been a bit distant the past few days, wondering if maybe things between them were starting to shift. "I love you," David said simply. "I need you to know that. I don't think I've said it enough. I love you with a depth that sometimes scares me. I love you for your talent, your kindness, your courage. I love who you are and who you're becoming." Marcus felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. "I love you too," he said. "I know," David said, "and that makes what I'm about to ask easier but also harder." He took a deep breath. "I'm not asking you to marry me. You're 17 and you have so much of your life ahead of you. There's so much you need to experience and explore, but I am asking you to promise me something." "Anything," Marcus said immediately. "Promise me that no matter what happens between us, even if we break up and go our separate ways, you'll never go back into hiding," David said. Promise me that you'll stay visible, stay authentic, stay proud of who you are. Promise me that you won't let fear or heartbreak make you smaller. The world needs your light, Marcus." Marcus felt as though his chest might burst with emotion. He reached over and kissed David, pouring all of his love and gratitude into that kiss. "I promise," he said when they finally broke apart. "I promise you, I promise myself, and I promise every person like me who's still struggling to find their way out of the darkness." They sat together as the sun set fully, the sky transforming into shades of purple and pink and gold. Marcus thought about what it meant to be loved like this, not possessively, not with the desire to control or own, but with a fierce determination to support his growth and authenticity. Marcus's senior year began with a new sense of purpose and identity. He was out at school, and while there had been some initial awkwardness and a few unkind comments, the overwhelming response from his peers and teachers had been positive. His soccer team had been initially surprised by his revelation, but his coach had made it clear that he was valued as a player and a person, and his teammates had largely followed suit. The Harmony Project expanded significantly that year, with Marcus taking on more leadership responsibilities alongside David. Together, they created a mentorship program where senior members like Marcus helped younger members navigate coming out and identity issues. Marcus found that talking to other young people about their struggles, while drawing on his own experiences, was deeply fulfilling. In November, Marcus was invited to speak at the school's diversity assembly about his experience as a gay teen. He performed "Before You Found Me" with David, and the auditorium was moved to tears. Afterward, dozens of students approached him to thank him for being brave enough to be visible, to show them that it was possible to be gay and happy and accepted. Sarah attended the assembly and watched her son with tremendous pride. She thought about the boy he had been: withdrawn, afraid, carrying impossible secrets. And she thought about the young man he was becoming: confident, authentic, committed to helping others. That evening, David came over for dinner. Over pasta and salad, he mentioned that he'd been accepted into a graduate program in music composition at a prestigious university in California, starting the following fall. The table went quiet. "That's wonderful," Sarah said, the words feeling both true and devastating at the same time. "It is," David said quietly. "But it also means I'm thinking about my relationship with Marcus differently, which is why I wanted to talk to both of you about it." Marcus looked stricken. "You're breaking up with me?" he asked. "No," David said quickly, reaching across the table to take Marcus's hand. "I'm not breaking up with you, but I am acknowledging that this relationship has a time limit on its current form. I'm moving across the country in the fall. I can't ask you to uproot your senior year and come with me. And long-distance relationships are hard, especially when one person is in high school and the other is in graduate school." "So what are you saying?" Marcus asked, his voice small. "I'm saying that I love you," David said firmly. "And because I love you, I want to do what's best for you, not just what's easy for me. I think we need to be realistic about what this relationship can be." Sarah interjected gently, "Are you talking about breaking up?" "I'm talking about transforming," David said. "Marcus is going to go to college. He's going to meet other people. He's going to grow and change and become something even more extraordinary than he already is. And I don't want him to feel like he has to choose between that growth and our relationship." "So we're ending this?" Marcus asked, pain evident in his voice. "We're transitioning," David said. "We're acknowledging that the romantic relationship might not survive the distance and the changes ahead, but the love doesn't disappear. The commitment doesn't disappear. I'm going to always be there for you, Marcus, just maybe not as a boyfriend." The months that followed were complicated and emotional. Marcus and David remained together through the end of Marcus's senior year, but with a different understanding of what their relationship was and where it was going. They were less focused on the romantic aspects and more focused on deepening their friendship, on creating memories that would last, on supporting each other through the transitions ahead. The night before David left for California in late August, they organized a concert, a final performance of the Harmony Project before David stepped back to focus on graduate school. The concert was titled Transitions, and it featured pieces about change, loss, growth, and resilience. Marcus performed "Before You Found Me" one final time with David. But this time, instead of it being a love song, it had evolved into something more universal. It was about the journey of finding yourself and finding your people, and about the various forms that love could take. Sarah sat in the audience with Marcus's father James, who had driven up for the event. James had become a regular at Harmony Project concerts, supportive of his son even if he didn't entirely understand the nuances of his sexual identity. Next to them sat Jennifer and several of Sarah's other friends. The auditorium was packed with people who had been touched by the Harmony Project's mission and message. When the concert ended, there was a reception. People congratulated David on his acceptance to graduate school. They thanked Marcus for his leadership and his inspiring performances. They celebrated the community that had been built, the lives that had been changed. Later that night, Sarah found Marcus and David sitting on the porch of her house, talking quietly. "I want you both to know," Sarah said, sitting down beside them, "that I've learned so much from watching your relationship. You've taught me that love takes many forms, that sometimes the most important relationships are the ones that transform and evolve rather than stay the same. And that being authentic, being visible, being willing to be vulnerable, that's the highest form of love we can give each other." "Thank you for accepting me," David said to Sarah, "for accepting us. It meant everything to Marcus and it meant everything to me too." "Thank you for loving my son and for helping him find himself," Sarah replied. "You'll always be welcome in our home." Over the following year, Marcus thrived. He finished his senior year with excellent grades and was accepted to several universities with scholarships. He chose to stay relatively close to home, attending UMass Boston, where he joined a vibrant LGBTQ+ student organization and continued his involvement with music. He and David maintained their friendship from a distance. They video called regularly, shared updates about their lives, sent each other their latest compositions. And while the romantic element of their relationship faded, the love and respect remained. Marcus dated other people in college, a girl who was also exploring her sexuality, a boy who loved music as much as he did, and eventually settled into a long-term relationship with a fellow music student named Alex, who understood his passion for art and community. But his relationship with David would always remain special, a first love that had taught him so much about himself, about courage, about the many forms that love could take. 5 years after that final concert, the Harmony Project organized a reunion. David had finished his graduate degree and was now working as a music composer for an independent film company in Los Angeles. Marcus was in his final year of college, studying music education and planning to teach music in public schools. The reunion was held in the same basement where the Harmony Project had first met. The space had been renovated and expanded, now featuring a small recording studio donated by local supporters. The walls were covered with photos of performers spanning the organization's 10-year history. When David arrived from California, there was a moment where he and Marcus locked eyes across the room. 5 years had passed. They had both changed. David had become a successful composer, Marcus had become a dedicated educator and musician. But the connection between them remained unchanged. They embraced, and in that embrace was the entire story of their relationship, the love, the support, the difficult decisions, the mutual growth. And then they pulled apart and smiled at each other, genuinely happy for who the other had become. "You look good," David said. "So do you," Marcus replied. "How's California?" "Sunny, expensive, creative," David said with a laugh. "How's college?" "Challenging, fulfilling. I think I'm really going to be a good teacher," Marcus said. They spent the evening reconnecting with other members of the Harmony Project, some who had moved on to other parts of the country, some who remained in the area. They listened to current members perform new pieces, including one composed by David specifically for this reunion. At the end of the night, David pulled Marcus aside. "I've been thinking about something," David said, "about how much you meant to me and how much you still mean to me." "David," Marcus began, wondering if they were about to revisit old territory. "Let me finish," David said with a smile. "I wanted to thank you for being brave enough to be yourself when it would have been so much easier to stay hidden, for helping build this community, for letting me be part of your journey even when that journey meant we had to let go of our romantic relationship." "Thank you," Marcus said, his eyes filling with tears, "for all of that and more, for showing me what love could look like, for being my first love." "You were my greatest inspiration," David replied. "Your courage, your authenticity, the way you refuse to be anything less than fully yourself, that's what I try to bring to my music now. I write about real things, real people, real emotions. And I do that because I learned from you how important it is to be honest." Sarah, who had attended the reunion to show her support for the organization that had changed her son's life, watched this interaction from across the room. She thought about the journey her son had taken, from the boy sneaking out in the darkness to find acceptance to the young man who was now helping others find their own light. She thought about how love had transformed him, not just romantic love, though that had played a role, but also the love of community, the love of art, the love of self-discovery, and most importantly, the love of his mother who had chosen to see him fully, to support him completely, to celebrate all that he was. Sarah Chen sat in the audience of a concert hall in Boston watching her son perform. Marcus was now 37 years old, a successful music teacher and composer in his own right. He had married Alex 5 years prior and they had 2 children together. He was performing as part of a fundraiser for the Harmony Project, which had expanded to include chapters in 3 states. The Harmony Project had evolved significantly over the years. What had started as a small singing group in a basement had become a national organization dedicated to supporting LGBTQ+ youth through music and community building. David, who had become a renowned film composer, had donated a significant portion of his wealth to endow the organization's educational programs. Marcus took the stage and raised his hand to quiet the applause. In the wings, Sarah could see David watching from backstage. He had flown in from California for the event. They had remained close friends over the decades, their connection deepened by the years and the journey they had shared. "I want to dedicate this performance to my mother, Sarah," Marcus announced, his voice warm with emotion. "25 years ago, she followed me into the darkness to understand my secret. She could have judged me, rejected me, or forced me to be someone I wasn't. Instead, she chose love. She chose acceptance. She chose to see me fully and to celebrate all that I am. This song is about that journey, from hiding to visibility, from fear to love, from secrets to authenticity. It's called The Midnight Secret, and it's the most important piece of music I've ever written." The concert hall fell silent as Marcus began to sing. His voice, now mature and rich with experience, poured out the story of his journey. The audience heard about the lonely boy hidden behind closed doors. They heard about the discovery of community, the finding of love, the courage it took to be visible. They heard about the mother who chose to love unconditionally and the mentor who taught him that authenticity was worth any price. As Marcus sang, Sarah found herself transported back in time. She remembered that cold December night when she'd followed her son into the darkness. She remembered the fear and confusion, the gradual understanding, the ultimate revelation of joy. She thought about how much both of them had grown, how much her son had flourished when she finally allowed him to be exactly who he was meant to be. When Marcus finished, the entire hall erupted in applause. Sarah stood with the rest of the audience, tears streaming down her face, her hands coming together so hard they stung. After the concert, Sarah made her way backstage where Marcus embraced her fiercely. "I love you so much," he said, holding his mother close. "I love you too," Sarah replied. "I'm so proud of who you've become." David approached with a warm smile. "You raised an incredible human being," he said to Sarah. "He raised himself," Sarah replied, squeezing both of their shoulders. "You both did, I just had the privilege of witnessing it." The three of them stood together, bound by the history they shared, the love that had transformed all of their lives. Outside the concert hall, the night air was cold and clear, but inside there was only warmth and light. Sarah realized then that the midnight secret her son had been carrying, the truth of his identity, his sexuality, his authentic self, had never been something to be ashamed of or hidden. It was a light that had been waiting to shine through. And by choosing to see him, to accept him, to celebrate him, she had allowed that light to radiate not just through her son's life, but through the lives of countless others who had found themselves reflected in his courage and his art. That was the real secret, she understood, not the hidden truth but the transformative power of love, the way it could reach into darkness and gently illuminate the path forward, the way it could turn shame into pride, fear into courage, secrets into songs. The way it could change everything. 10 years after that concert, Marcus received a visitor at his school during lunch period. It was a senior student named Jamie who had recently come out and was struggling with family acceptance. "Mr. Chen," Jamie said hesitantly, "I was wondering if you might, know anything about how to come out to parents. I know you're gay and all, and I'm scared." Marcus recognized in that moment something of himself at 17. He thought about the secret he'd carried, the fear, the isolation, and he thought about what it might have meant to have had a teacher like him to talk to back then. "Come in," he said warmly, closing his office door. "Let me tell you a story." And as Marcus told Jamie about the night he'd snuck out to find his people, about the boy following his mother's instincts into darkness, about finding love and community and truth, he realized that his mother's real gift had been more than acceptance. It had been the ability to pass that acceptance forward. Because every student Marcus ever worked with would grow up knowing that someone like them, someone successful, someone accomplished, someone proud, had walked the same path. And that knowledge was transformative in ways that biology alone could never be. The Midnight Secret had evolved into a beacon in the daylight. And that was the greatest love story of all.